What exactly do transitions do? What does the word transition mean? Well, in writing, transitions are often compared to signposts. In this picture, you can see signs pointing to different places in Britain, and you'd follow the pointer on the sign, for instance, to get to London, which is 229 kilometers from wherever the sign is posted. Well, if you think of a transition in a paper, like a sign, it'll help you to imagine what their function is. If your friend invites you to a party and you don't know where that friend lives, they may say, well, you go 5 miles down this road and you take a left at this street, and then you go down a little bit further and we're the second house on the right. Without those directions, you wouldn't be able to find the party. Transitions are similar. They're used to help writers facilitate understanding for their readers. They can be words like first, next, finally, in conclusion, or they can be chapter titles. Chapter 1. They might be section titles. Introduction, explanation, conclusion. The purpose of transitions is, in my opinion, to walk the reader through your ideas. When I'm trying to teach this to students, to younger students, I often ask them to imagine a younger sibling that they might help across the street. And I like the image of, holding a younger sibling's hand and walking with them, helping them through something difficult. So in the same way, you might hold your younger sibling's hand and walk them through your ideas. And in order to communicate with them successfully, you need to give them directions along the way. First, you must do this. Second, this comes along. Third, this happens. So you can use transitions. The transitions happen between any section in a paper, and that section could be, like I said, a chapter. It could be a group of paragraphs that are arranged into a part of a chapter. You can transition between paragraphs. You can transition between sentences and even between words. So what I like to do when I'm beginning a paper is imagine, how long it is, how long it needs to be. And in my experience, let's say I'm writing a 5-page paper about social media and bullying. I know from the writing that I've done that I can average about 2 paragraphs a page. This is double-spaced in APA style, Times New Roman 12-point font, about 2 paragraphs a page of text. So if I have a 5-page limit, that means I have about 10 paragraphs total to work with in that space. I then remember, well, I'm going to have an introduction. I'm going to have a conclusion. At minimum, those are going to be a paragraph apiece. So that leaves me about 8 body paragraphs to work with. So if I'm writing about social media and bullying, how am I going to divide those paragraphs so that I can cover that information adequately for the reader? Well, I might decide that I want to talk about social media by itself, and then maybe bullying by itself, and then talk about the combined effect. How does one impact the other, and vice versa? So if I do a little bit of math, I realize that gives me, if I break it up equally, about 3 paragraphs per section. Okay, so now I have sections. So I have 3 sections: social media, bullying, and then social media's effect on bullying. And I have figured out that I'm probably going to have about 3 body paragraphs on each, introduction and a conclusion. So right there, I've already got some ideas for how I might transition. I could name those sections. I could use a header, like a level 1 heading, or a title that's bolded that says social media, and then after 3 paragraphs I'd have another section, bullying, and after 3 paragraphs another section. So these are transitions. If this paper formed the basis of a book. Maybe this would be chapter 3, chapter 4, whatever. Those are transitions. They're signposts that guide the reader, that tell you, okay, you're moving from the social media section into the bullying section. So do you have to use section titles and headers all the time? No, you don't have to. You decide as the writer, is this going to be helpful to the reader, or is this more information than the reader needs to successfully navigate this information? So transitioning between sections is one thing. It's more common when we're talking about writing at this level to think about how we transition between ideas and thoughts. In other words, between paragraphs and sentences. So that's when we get into some really common words and phrases. And if you Google transitional words and phrases on the internet, you will find pages and pages and pages of examples of words. So I've added a few of them here for you, and they have different purposes. So if you're transitioning within a paragraph and you're talking about time, you might say after step 1, or use the first, second, third, later words in subsequent paragraphs to show that you're working through a process. Those kinds of transitions often are intuitive. We write the way we speak, and if we're teaching someone something or talking them through a procedure, we'd say, well, first this, then that, next you do this, and finally this other thing. Some transitions show a result, as the last transitional phrase there shows as a result, consequently, therefore. And these are words that typically would come at the beginning of a sentence, but they could come in other places too. You may want to add something or compare within a paragraph. So you'd say, for example, or in addition. Some transitional phrases help to clarify. These are used a lot in the explanation part of an analytical paragraph when you're trying to rephrase or reframe the evidence that you've used to support a claim. You might say what this means is, or to put it another way. And then, of course, you can contrast, yet, however, but instead. And those are only some of the categories of transitional words and phrases. Know that if you ever want to find them, you can simply Google transitional words and find many, many lists like that one that are even more extensive than that. So let me give you a couple of examples. Now, this paragraph is one from a paper that I wrote, or something that I wrote for a class I took a couple of years ago on literature of immigrants, I think, to America. And I'm not going to read you the entire paragraph. You can read it if you want to, but look at what is marked in red are what I would consider transitional phrases that are helping me to move the reader between one thought and another. So just if you look at the statements in black, I remember telling ninth graders who were writing, the phrase came to mind, it's hard to imagine the narrative structure. Otsuka shows the reader. Otsuka's women describe the first night. Otsuka's repetition of the phrase, Otsuka puts the reader in the place of each woman. If you just look at the beginnings of those sentences, there's a subject and a verb. It's a very basic, simple sentence structure, subject and predicate. Okay, so I could have left out all of those transitional phrases and still communicated the ideas through those simple sentences. But by adding the transitional phrases, I'm welcoming the reader in, I'm grabbing the reader's hand, and I'm helping them through my ideas. So this first transitional phrase, when I started teaching, gives an idea of the time, right? When I started teaching, I remember telling ninth graders. Okay, so that helps the reader see, okay, we're kind of going back in time. The next one, it's likely that every English teacher. So that's a transitional phrase, bringing the reader, I guess, back into the present and reflecting on the profession of teaching. Although, in the next one is a transitional word that is kind of conceding a point. through the words of multiple narrators. These dependent clauses are, functioning as transitions, and they're helping to walk the reader through. A more traditional one in this passage, for example, there's 2 transitions in a row. And then the last one you can see is a lot longer, but those are some examples of how transitions work to help smooth the way for a reader and help keep them on track. Here's another example from a student paper that I received a couple years ago. This writer's talking about animal testing, and she begins with a very simple transitional phrase, "in recent history," which gives us an idea of the time, and then we have a statement, subject and predicate, and then she does here. This is a particular transition that's used in research writing. It's called a signal phrase, where, according to the Committee on the Use of Animals in Research in their publication titled such and such, that signal phrase is a way of giving credit to an article or to an author. It's a form of citing research that is required when you're using someone else's work. You can see after that quote there's a parenthetical reference. The P.6 means page 6. So the author isn't mentioned, or the year isn't mentioned in that parenthetical citation, because this writer has stated in the signal phrase. Then after the evidence, there's a for instance, and this would be the analysis part where you're explaining how that evidence supports the claim. A for instance, and then some examples of this, and then in addition. Okay, so adding to that explanation. So transitions can be used in all kinds of writing. They're really useful in research writing, and this is a particular way that they're used through the signal phrase, where you're announcing who the author is. So to sum up, transitions, kind of like directions to a party. This is how you get there. So if you think of them as helping someone to find their way through your ideas, it may help you to know when to use them. I often add transitions after I've written a paragraph. When I'm revising, I'll go back and as I'm reading, I'm thinking to myself, oh, there's quite a big gap in thinking between this sentence and the next one. What do I need to put in there in order to smooth the way for the reader? Often when we're writing, our thoughts are flying through our heads, and we write down as many of them as we can, and sometimes the thinking is a logical progression, but the writing that we do doesn't reflect that thinking. So a lot of times transitions come more easily after you've written something and you're trying to revise and make the writing clearer for the reader. Remember that you can think of transitions as bigger items like a chapter or a section title. You transition between paragraphs and also between and within sentences.